Hello everyone, and welcome to my video where I will demonstrate how you can create a multi-agentic workflow using AWS services. I'm building out a travel agent that can recommend either hotels and Airbnbs or restaurants, all using Amazon Bedrock Agents. Amazon Bedrock Agents uses the reasoning of foundation models, APIs, and data to break down user requests, gather information, and efficiently complete tasks. Next, here is our agenda. So first, I will cover the components of the project, then I'll walk you through the workflow of the project, and lastly, I will do a demonstration of the project. Here are our components. So first, I have API Gateway, which just manages interactions between clients and backend services. Then we have Lambda, which will allow you to run code without provisioning or managing servers. Then we have Amazon Bedrock, which will provide our foundation models through an API. Then we have Amazon S3, which acts as object storage, and then we have Postman for testing our API. Now, here's our architecture. So first, we're going to build an API that can be invoked, and we'll use Postman to invoke it through the internet. Once API Gateway is called, a Lambda function will be triggered. That Lambda function is going to hit the supervisor agent, which is an LLM in agentic form. It will transform the user's input and decide whether the user wants to stay at a hotel or Airbnb, or if the user is looking for a restaurant. For this architecture, let's just say the user is looking for a restaurant. Once the restaurant agent is called upon, the action group that it is connected to, which is our Lambda function, we'll be able to filter through the CSV files placed in an S3 bucket based on the user's needs. And when that information is retrieved, it is sent back to its agent, and then that agent sends it back to the supervisor agent, which will then reformat that response, and then it'll send it to the Lambda function, which will then send to API Gateway, and it'll be outputted through Postman. Our next step is to create Amazon S3 buckets. So first, I'm going to show you the CSV files that we will be uploading to these buckets, and then we will go through the process of adding it to the buckets. So here I have all the CSV files side by side just so we can take a look at what's included in them. So for Airbnb, we have the name of the Airbnbs, the locations, whether pets are allowed, if there's a pool available, and also saunas. Then for restaurants, we have the name of the restaurants, the city of the restaurants, and whether or not it's fine dining. And then lastly, we have the hotels and the locations of the hotels. Now what we're going to do is create a new bucket and put all these files in that bucket. So now within the AWS console, we're going to navigate over to S3 and select Create Bucket. And remember that your bucket name has to be unique, so do not use the same bucket name as me or it will not create. And we'll select Create Bucket. And now that our bucket is created, let's scroll through and see where our bucket is, which is here. And then I'm going to select Upload. And here is where we'll upload those 3 CSV files we just looked at. So I'm going to select Add Files. And here I'm going to select Open. And I'm going to repeat the process for the other 2 files as well. Now we can scroll down and select Upload. And to double check that our files loaded properly, we can go back to our buckets and click into our new bucket, and here we can see the files have uploaded. For our next step, we'll be creating our restaurant agent. Now let's build our agents. Let's go over to Amazon Bedrock. Under Build, select Agents and Create Agent, and this one will be our restaurant agent. And we can leave these 2 empty and click Create. And the settings that are already set, we can leave, but we do need to add our instructions for the agent, which is the actual task that the agent will be performing. And here are those set instructions that I will be pasting in that box. Feel free to pause the video if needed. We'll paste that here, and then we need to save it. Now that that's done, we need to create an action group, and this one will be called the restaurant action group. And we'll leave those settings as is and go down to the action group function, and this will be called list restaurants. Now we need to add two parameters. So first it will be city, and it will be the city where the user wants to dine for the description. And for required, change that to true. And now we need to add our second parameter called find dine. And the description will be whether the user wants to find dine or not. And for required, we also need to select true for this one and click create. Now that that's created, we're going to save it again. Click prepare. And then click save and exit. And then we'll create an alias, and this one will be called restaurant alias, and create the alias here. Now that's it for our restaurant agent. Now we will be building out our accommodation agent. So now let's build out our accommodation agent. So we'll go to agents and we'll follow that same process that we used for the restaurant agent. And we need to enter in instructions. So here is our agent instructions. Feel free to pause the video if needed and select save. Now we need to add an action group, and this one will be called accommodation action group. And we need to add action group functions. So the first function will be called list hotels, and this one will only have one parameter called location. And the description will be location of the hotel, and required will be set to true. Next, we need to add another action group function, and this will be called list Airbnbs. And this one will have a total of 4 parameters. So the first parameter will be called location, and the description will be location of the Airbnb, and required will be set to true. Then we add another parameter called pets, and the description will be whether pets are allowed or not. And we'll set required to true. And we'll add another parameter called pool, and it will be whether a pool is available for the description. And required should be set to true for this one. And last but not least, we have sauna. And the description will be whether a sauna is available. And lastly, we will mark this as true. And now we click create. Once that is successfully created, we'll select save, prepare, and then save and exit. Now we need to create an alias, so we'll click here and we'll call it the accommodation alias and select create alias. And now we have successfully created our accommodation agent. Now for this section, we will be configuring our action groups in Lambda. So now we need to configure our action groups within Lambda. So we're going to select our restaurant agent first, select edit in agent builder. And if we scroll to our action group, just click that action group and select view. And it'll take us over to Lambda. And we have our dummy Lambda file here. What I'm going to do is just replace this code. I'm not going to walk through the code line by line just for time's sake, but this is my code and I will click deploy so the code will save. And now that this code is saved, I will do the same for the accommodation agent. Now I'm going to navigate back to Bedrock to access our accommodation agent here, and we'll follow the same steps. So now we have successfully configured both of our Lambda functions for this project. In this step, we will be creating and modifying our supervisor agent. Now let's build out our supervisor agent. So we'll go here to create agent and we'll call this supervisor agent. And we're going to enable our multi-agent collaboration here. Now that it's created, we need to add our instructions for this agent, and here are those instructions that I will be using, and I'm going to copy and paste this in that box. And we need to save it. We now need to create an alias for our supervisor agent as well, and we'll just call it supervisor alias, and we'll just click create alias there. And this will be useful when we create our Lambda function that will be invoking our supervisor agent, and I'll show you why in a second. Then once everything has successfully updated, we'll select prepare. And now we're able to test our actual supervisor agent here. So now what we need to do is scroll down to multi-agent collaboration and select edit. And here where it says agent collaborator, we'll click that drop down and we'll select our accommodation agent first and the alias for it. And this will be called the accommodation collaborator here. And we also need to add instructions for this as well. And this is important because when a lot of agents and functions are working together, the better it'll work with the instructions and the less likely it'll hallucinate. So here is our instructions for the accommodation collaborator. And again, you can pause the video if you need to read it out. And I'm going to paste it in this box. And then I will enable conversation history sharing. And then we're going to add a second collaborator, which will be our second agent, our restaurant agent. And we'll add the alias, and the collaborator will be the restaurant collaborator. and we need to add those instructions for that as well. And we'll do the same here by enabling conversation history sharing, and then we'll save it. Then we'll click Save and Exit. In this step, we will be creating our Lambda function that will invoke the supervisor agent. So now let's go to Create Function, and we're going to name this function Invoke Supervisor Agent. And for the runtime, I'm going to use Python. Feel free to use whatever code type you'd like, and then we'll go to Create Function. Now that our function is created, we're going to go ahead and paste in our function code, but there are some things that we need to add in here, which is our agent ID and our agent alias ID. So first we'll add our agent ID, where you will click into your supervisor agent and here the ID will show. So we'll just copy and paste that in here. And then for the agent alias ID, if you scroll all the way down, here is that ID that we're looking for, and we'll paste that in here. Just want to make sure there's no spaces, and that should be good for this section, and we'll click deploy. And we can select accept, and it looks like our code has successfully deployed. For this step, we'll be creating our API gateway. Now we're going to create our API gateway by first clicking Create an API, and where it says HTTP API, we're going to select Build, and this is the best choice for invoking our agent. We'll name this Bedrock API. And we need to add an integration with Lambda. And for our Lambda function, we need to choose the function that invokes our supervisor agent. Click Next, and then we need to add a root with a post method, and our resource path will be get agent's response. And the integration target will be invoke the supervisor agent, and we'll select Next, and we can leave that as is, and now we click Create. Now we have successfully created our Bedrock API. Last but not least, we will be testing our endpoint through the internet using Postman. So now we need to test in Postman by clicking our API, and we need to select this invocation URL, and we'll paste it here. And we also need to change this to post. We then need to add our route to the end of this, which, if you remember, was get agent's response. And now we need to go to body and raw, and I'm going to enter in text. And for text, I'll just say I am looking for a dog-friendly Airbnb. And make sure that is in quotes as well. And we'll add a comma, and we need to add a session ID. And I'll just put a random number like 20. And we should be good to go to send it. And now we've understood that this worked by our response we got. So it says, I understand you are looking for a dog-friendly Airbnb, which is great. To help you find the perfect place, I need to know which city you're planning on staying in. Could you please provide the name of the city where you'll be looking for an Airbnb? So we know this worked and our agents are working. If you're seeing this, that means you made it to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share.